All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Afterlife Apologetics. This is episode 4, where we're going to be engaging with some more naturalistic objections, okay? And why we want to do this is we are very much interested in continuing to establish the legitimacy of near-death experiences as reliable evidence, as reliable medical evidence for just considering the spiritual realm and the implications of near-death experiences. So we want to really get this foundation to be super solid before we start moving into some of the theological objections that Christians may have about the near-death experience itself, because we want to first and foremost establish them as reliable physical experiences or reliable physical spiritual experiences. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you've said it. It sounds good.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what we have today is we've got a really viral article from Scientific American that I'm going to pull up here in a minute that we're going to engage with, just to show the name of the article is Peace of Mind, Near-Death Experiences Now Found to Have Scientific Explanations. Again, that's an incredibly misleading title based off of the content of the article to begin with, because it doesn't really... it's funny because they say it's like found to have scientific explanation, Steve, but when we read it, it sounds like they're just theorizing some potential scenarios that could be happening, but they don't know for sure. So again, it's this kind of fawning confidence that they have the solution. And then when we go through and read it, and you guys will notice that if you've listened to our second episode, episode 2, where we engage with these on a little more detail, and we'll cover these back again here. You'll notice that we have addressed these, but we're going to definitely address them again in this article. So, Steve, feel free to interrupt me when I'm going through this article. If you feel like I need to skip it or I've read enough or move to the next thing, just let me know. And then after we engage with this article, we do plan on then moving over and actually listening. We have a clip pulled up, or we have a video pulled up of a panel of cardiologists discussing their experience with patients having out-of-body experiences with them. And that this will just kind of help set the stage of medical scientists, doctors having discussions around these experiences happening within their own lives, their own patients, their own practices, and just some of the implications of that. How's that sound, Steve? Anything to add?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So, Steve, I know you're not going to be able to see this, but I'm going to share the Peace of Mind near-death experiences. So we'll cycle back and forth. The link to this article will be in the description for today's video. So if you want to go read it yourself, here it is. But of course, we're going to read it right from here. So they go with approximately 3% of the U.S. population says they've had a near-death experience, according to Gallup poll. Near-death experiences are reported across all cultures, or across cultures, with written records of them dating back to ancient Greece. So you guys will note that we brought this up last time, where we were talking about, we mentioned this last week, Plato's Republic was one of the first ones that was noted long time ago in ancient Greece. And since then, we found many, many more in the history books. Okay, so swap back over. So not all of these experiences actually coincide with brushes with death. One study of 58 patients who recounted near-death experiences found that 30 were not actually in danger of dying, although most of them thought that they were. I think that sounds like it's cherry picking, Steve. What do you think about that?
Just one study,
Yeah, just
you
one
have to
study.
compare all the studies. If you look at Dr. Sabom's study, all of these were experiencing cardiac arrest. So, clinical death. So, yeah, you can pick any study and say, oh, well, some of these really weren't experiencing death. True.
Yeah. Just one study, even though there's thousands and thousands going the opposite way, right? Recently, a host of studies has revealed potential underpinnings for all the elements of such experiences. So, and this is a quote from Dean Mobbs at the University of Cambridge, quote, "Many of the phenomenon associated with near-death experiences can be biologically explained." Okay. So, and that's Dean Mobbs at University of Cambridge Medical Research Council. This sets the stage of many of the phenomena associated with near-death experiences can be biologically explained. This is going to pull back the Tom Brady metaphor. That's definitely going to make its way into this episode, so we can explain why that doesn't do a good job. So here's what they're going to do now. They're going to list out some of the key characteristics that we find associated with near-death experiences, and then they're going to try to potentially provide a biological, physiological explanation for how that can happen. So, for instance, the feeling of being dead is not limited to near-death experiences. Patients with KOTOR, also known as walking corpse syndrome, hold the delusional belief that they are deceased. And then they go on to kind of discuss how this could be related to basically low brain health, right? There are very, very poor brain health that can result in things like this has been observed in psychiatric conditions such as schizophrenia. Although the mechanism behind the syndrome remains unknown, one possible explanation is that patients are trying to make sense of the strange experiences they are having. So that's them attempting to make sense of the feeling of being dead, which I'm sure Steve's going to beat me to the punch to this, but maybe not, since I'm doing all the talking. But with that in mind, you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just people saying that they feel dead. This is people who are having death scenarios in front of medical professionals and many medical professionals in professional medical environments, hospitals, practices, so on and so forth. So to simply just say, well, this explains away the fact that people feel dead, that's ridiculous. Okay, that doesn't take into account all the people who are experiencing death with witnesses who were there, who would later then go on to be interviewed and account their own testimonies of these experiences happening. Anything to add to that, Steve?
Well, let's go back to Tom Brady here. Okay, let's say that he just won a Super Bowl, and they're interviewing him, and somebody says, no, wait, let's be scientific about this. There are a lot of people out there that I've seen in my psychiatric practice who feel like they've won a Super Bowl. So does that call into question that he really had one? Well, no. So basically, the reason we're bringing up this article is it's going to list the typical naturalistic explanations, many of which have been given since 1975. It's going to say that, all these books that are out there, they really haven't dealt with the naturalistic possibilities for explaining it. And I'm going to say, well, Moody had a whole section looking at anoxia, the problem of lack of oxygen. What about hallucinations? What about this? And Moody was studying psychiatry at the time. He became a psychiatrist in medicine, philosopher and psychiatrist. And he was dealing with these. And then these have been studied through the years. So what this article does is it neglects to look at the research that's been done in the past on these very naturalistic explanations, and then it's going to act like it's come up with something new. They're actually quoting another article that was in another journal that was making these claims. And we're going to find out some things about this article, but I'm bringing it up because if you're searching near-death experiences, you can cherry pick and find, even in the peer-reviewed literature, things to back up whatever you want to believe about them, but we need to use more discernment when we look at them. And I think when we compare this case, that'll give us something to look back at and say, hey, do these naturalistic explanations really fully explain what was going on in this case?
Yeah, I think I know the one you're referencing, because I'm pretty sure I remember coming across this in much of the literature engaging with this particular study. But so out-of-body experiences are also known to be common during interrupted sleep patterns that immediately precede sleeping or waking. For instance, sleep paralysis, or the experience of feeling paralyzed while still aware of the outside world, is reported in up to 40% of all people and is linked with vivid, dreamlike hallucinations that can result in the sensation of floating above one's body. A 2005 study found that out-of-body experiences can be artificially triggered by stimulating the right temporal lobe, junction in the brain, suggesting that confusion regarding sensory information can radically alter how one experiences one's body.
Okay, so I mean, basically, you could back and say, "Hey, let's look at the content of 1,000 dreams." Oh, here's a dream where somebody thought they were with a deceased relative. Oh, here's a dream where somebody thought that they saw a bright light. Here's a dream where somebody thought they saw their body. But that doesn't necessarily do anything to explain a near-death experience. Why do you have this consistent set of experiences, whereas in these dream states and others, they're so varied? So, yes, they're bringing up some naturalistic duplicators of certain aspects of near-death experiences, but they're not really dealing with the evidence that's risen through the years. So we don't really have to go into all of these explanations they gave. You can look at those on your own if you want to, anybody. But maybe we just ought to give this experience from a reputable scientific organization and see what it says, and then I'll come back to this article.
Okay, so you want us to go view that video and then come back to this?
I think I'd like to, yes.
Okay, sounds good.
Because it's just saying the same things that have been brought up over and over again, actually, and some of which we've already dealt with.
Yeah, yeah. It does try to provide, like, before we move on, I do want to, like, this next paragraph really emphasizes the whole methodology that they're kind of bringing to this article. So it says a variety of explanations might also account for reports by those dying of meeting the deceased. Parkinson's disease patients, for example, have reported visions of ghosts, even monsters. The explanation: Parkinson's involves abnormal functioning of dopamine, a neurotransmitter that can invoke hallucinations. And when it comes to the common experience of reliving moments from one's life, one culprit might be the locus coeruleus, a midbrain region that releases noradrenaline, a stress hormone one would expect to be released in high levels during trauma. The locus coeruleus is highly connected with brain regions that mediate emotion and memory, such as the amygdala or hypothalamus. So I guess the reason I wanted to read that out is because I'm pointing out that they're just kind of like throwing darts at the board and saying, well, there's a variety of explanations that can account for these people seeing deceased relatives. For example, Parkinson's disease patients have reports of vision ghosts, even monsters. The explanation: Parkinson's involves abnormal functioning of dopamine. And it evokes a hallucination. Again, these people come out of these experiences knowing that what they saw was a hallucination.
Right.
That's not what's happening with near-death experience.
And they're extremely varied. You're going to see in these hallucinations, you're going to see people who are alive on Earth. You're going to see all kinds of things. Yes, monsters. It's just like DMT. You're going to see a huge variety of things, but that doesn't necessarily account for what's going on in a near-death experience.
Exactly, and so they're also combining two pieces here. They're saying that, okay, you take Parkinson's and then you involve this other section of the brain, which is going to be reliving moments from one's life. And we've already talked about the fact that when they're seeing deceased relatives, they're not seeing deceased relatives as they saw them. They're seeing deceased relatives at their prime. So it's like when you have people who don't have Parkinson's who are experiencing this, and as far as we can tell, they have completely healthy brains. Like, for example, if they die from cardiac arrest, that's going to leave the brain relatively intact in terms of its actual content. At least that's how I understand the literature to suggest that. So then you have that and saying, okay, well, if we take Parkinson's and the phenomenon associated with Parkinson's and then these other areas of the brain that can recall memories, it's like they're just duct taping all this stuff together and saying, see, we have a solution.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we'll come back to this article, ladies and gentlemen, but we're going to come over to what really happens after cardiac arrest. Do you want to set the stage for this, Steve? I know you had some information on this.
Yeah, okay. I think the importance of this is that often people say, oh, these are just religious people trying to give apologetics for their faith or whatever, or these are near-death experience enthusiasts who are already believing in the experience, and so they get together at their conferences and talk about these things. But this is at a panel discussion at a very well-respected Academy of Sciences, New York Academy of Sciences event. So this is a secular event that's addressing what happens when people die. It's talking about the latest in resuscitation and what does death mean. So they're discussing the scientific evidence of what's going on. These are professionals in the area of resuscitation, understanding death. The New York Academy of Sciences is over 200 years old. Thomas Jefferson was a member of it. Very well respected. Sam Parnia has 2 doctorates, one in medicine, one in philosophy. He teaches at New York University in the medical area there. And then the other person, Dr. Tom Ofterheit, who's going to share of his experience, he's a professor at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Again, an expert in this area. So these are people that I think you can trust. They have their careers stand on their integrity, and they don't. There's no reason for them to be out saying outlandish things to get people's attention. They're already well respected. So I think there's a level of trust there. And I just like to hear what this person's experience is, because I think we can compare that to a lot of the naturalistic explanations.
So Sam Parnia is going to ask a question of Tom Ofterhide, and Ofterhide's going to actually answer this question. So we're going to be starting this video about 46 minutes in. Probably let it run for a couple minutes. See if you let me know when it's a good stopping point, and then we'll engage with that. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right.
A story from my very first day as a doctor. So you have to go way back to 1980. And I was lucky enough to be on call the first day as a doctor. It kind of characterizes my entire medical career. I was appropriately nervous, and I had a second-year supervising resident, and he assured me, Tom, I'll be there the entire night. Don't worry, got your back. Just do the best you can. So about 3 in the morning, he comes to me and says, I'm awfully tired. I'm going to the call room. I'm going to go to sleep. Well, shortly after that, I got a call to the coronary care unit with a new patient. And I went up, I introduced myself, and my patient's eyes rolled up in the back of his head, and he flopped back down on the bed. Now, being pretty much a layperson, I knew that there were only two options. Either he had fainted, or my worst nightmare had occurred, and he had actually had a cardiac arrest right in front of me on my first day. And this fleeting thought went through my head of anger that my second-year resident had not done what he said he was going to do, which was supervise me and be there. However, I realized that this really was a cardiac arrest only because the entire nursing staff of the CCU was running to my room with terrified looks on their faces. So I jumped right in, I started CPR, and this was in the days where we didn't even know the cause of a heart attack, which is an occlusion of a blood vessel to the heart. And we simply allowed the heart attack to complete, kept the patient comfortable with morphine, and if they arrested and their heart stopped, we'd defibrillate them and attempt to bring them back. Started CPR, defibrillated, the code team eventually showed up. He got intubated and was very refractory, so he did not get a pulse back for at least 25 minutes. Shock, 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 shock. Finally, after 25 minutes, we got a pulse, and unfortunately, he continued to then have another cardiac arrest about every 5 minutes. Well, this went on for an hour. Every 5 minutes, he had to be shocked. Finally, the code team said, well, we can't stay here all day. You're the intern. Here, you shock him, okay? Give us a call if you need our help. And so everybody left, and I was again left alone with my new patient, and continued to shock him about everything.
And they were pretty sure he was going to die, right?
Well,
there wasn't a lot of optimism.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. The prognosis was not.
That's why they left.
So I continued to do this, and very thankfully, one shock and the pulse would come back. He'd be good for another 5 minutes. And then I had to do it again. Well, this went on all morning. I had a couple minutes in between shocks to run and talk to his wife, and honestly, I painted a very bleak picture with her. Came back just in time to shock him again. Then his lunch showed up, and he wasn't going to eat it. I didn't get breakfast, so I ate his lunch. Okay, in between defibrillations. So about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he finally stabilized, and had a very rocky hospital course, and finally was about to go home 30 days later. So on rounds, I went in to the room to say goodbye to him, and to my surprise, he said, please come in, shut the door, and sit down. We have to talk. And so I did, and I sat down, and said, well, what can I help you with? He said, well, you know, first of all, I know you're an intern, but you've spent the most time with me. All the rest of the people come in for 30 seconds every morning and leave, so I consider you my doctor, and I need your help with an experience that I had when I died. And I got to tell you about this, and I need your help to process it. I said, well, go ahead. He said, well, when I arrested, I left my body, and I floated to the top of the ceiling, and I watched you. And you took this machine, and you would shock it. And what I noticed is you would do that every time my heart monitor would get kind of sawtooth. And then it would come back to more normal, and you would repeatedly do that. He said, well, then you went out and talked to my wife. And frankly, I didn't think you were very positive in your discussion with her. You could have been more positive. He said, and then, if that wasn't bad enough, you ate my lunch. But then he said something that really got my attention. And he said, you know, the one thing, though, that I wanted to tell you was that here I was dying in front of you, and you were standing there feeling sorry for yourself because your senior resident didn't back you up and left you alone. That got my attention, and it got my attention because he told me what I thought. And to this day, I could rationalize anything else. I could rationalize the wife told him about my discussion, the nurses told him about the lunch, he saw a reflection in the window of his cardiac rhythm, but I cannot understand how he knew what I thought. And that got my attention. Well, I didn't know what this phenomenon was, and so I said, well, why don't you talk to your minister? Oh, I'm sorry. So in addition to this, he had a whole other very detailed experience. He had a complete life review, as you've talked about. He went down a tunnel toward the light. He had what I would characterize as a deceased family reunion. He talked with his grandfather's grandmother, his mother's father. His pet dog was there that had died. He had talked with a being of light. He had some insights about both his life and his purpose in life, and was ultimately told that he needed to return. And he came back. And he wanted help with this. So I told him, I didn't know what this was at the time. And so I said, well, talk to your minister. And he said, well, I did. But I got halfway through my story, and he said, that's not in the Bible, walked out and slammed the door.
My gosh.
So I said, well, I don't know what this was, but I'll try to find somebody who does. So I called our psychiatrist. And I got halfway through the story, and the psychiatrist said, this is ridiculous, and hung up on me. So that event got me very interested in this phenomenon because the minister wasn't any help. The psychiatrist wasn't any help.
Sam was only like 10 years old, so you could
and Tom Afterlife wasn't any
Where
help.
are you two in your version?
We just finished at about 55 minutes, where he's basically saying that he called the minister, or the patient called the minister.
Yeah,
and the
keep
minister...
going for just a minute.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I actually bumped into Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, that I recognized this phenomenon. And in fact, throughout my career, there have been a number of similar stories that resuscitated patients have shared.
I mean, it's really incredible because I would be very skeptical if I were to hear that. I know you, and so I obviously, that's different. But we've all heard about them, and they're difficult to explain. But I also, when I started, people heard about my interest, and I had hundreds and hundreds of people writing to me with these experiences. And when you met them I interviewed them in person, you meet them face to face, and sometimes children who were less than 3 or 4 years old, who had no concept of what it's like to die, what happens when we die, none of these things. And it really touched me, and in particular, as I said, this concept that people review.
So did he just
their
mention
humanity,
Moody's book?
in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
period.
We're
And what-
Sam Parnia's talking now about.
Okay, let's just
he-
stop it here.
Okay.
This is a good stopping place.
Yeah, Sam Parnia starts talking about, these experiences are happening in children, and they're 3 to 4 years old, and they're consistent within this framework and this pattern. Again, and that's what fascinates these researchers, is not only that these things are occurring and they have these inexplanatory components to them, such as like Tom had mentioned, the guy had knew what he was thinking, even though he didn't say that out loud. And it seems like he's reaching pretty far for the guy to be dying basically from cardiac arrest, that he was going to be looking in the window, and then his wife told. So yeah, there are some naturalistic potential explanations for the factors in the story, but all of that to just say, he comes out and he's like, notices this pattern this guy goes through with the life review, meeting the being of light. And then he starts to see this pattern emerging within Raymond Moody's work. And now these other, and I'm sure, Sam Parnia, the doctor leading the panel, is going to start, and he starts sharing, oh yeah, it's happening in children, 3 to 4 years old. So again, this pattern's emerging. And like you said, it's a very reputable panel having this discussion in front of hundreds of people to listen to.
Right. And obviously, more subtly, if the person recognized this as a hallucination, he would have just said, well, this is an interesting hallucination. I just thought I'd tell you about it. But the whole reason that they wanted to talk to a minister, to talk to a psychiatrist, to get to the bottom of it, was he thought it was real.
Yeah.
And you know what? At that point, the doctor's saying, I can't explain it naturalistically. It's kind of like if you take away. So let's go back to the article again. You're thinking about it. Okay, well, maybe it was just caused by this or that. People have a little dream state and this happens, or people pass out and this happens, or you have too little oxygen in your brain, this might happen or something. But that does not explain how he heard the conversation outside with his wife, how he knew that he ate his lunch, when his eyes were closed, he was unconscious, how he knew. But particularly, he knew his thoughts. He had not expressed these things out loud. So naturalistic explanations seem to fit pretty well if you leave out all the supernatural data that is happening during the experience. And I'd also like to point out that the minister and the psychiatrist both rudely shut down the conversation. I think a part of the problem is that naturalism has been so strong in the 1900s that we're really uncomfortable with the supernatural. We're embarrassed by the supernatural.
Yeah.
And so the minister doesn't want to talk about it. Sounds weird to him. Hey, maybe this is a devil thing. I don't know, but you don't know much about it. And so you just politely change the subject or do something different because you don't want to address it. And then the psychiatrist, this ought to be a scientific person. One scientist said, hey, take the strangest thing out there, and study it, the thing that doesn't seem to fit with your other hypotheses. And yet, here's something really strange that I don't see a good reason for the guy to be lying. If you think it's a hallucination, talk to the guy about it, But why ignore it and just say, oh, this is crazy, I'm not going to deal with this? But I think that has been the reaction of many. And, and if you're a minister or if you're a person who has influence in the spiritual world and you're not interested in an experience who many people consider the most profound spiritual experience of their lives, if you don't have anything to say about that, you might be fairly irrelevant to a large portion of people. And as we've seen in the research, this is not just some anomalous experience. When Sabom, himself a cardiologist, studied these within his patients, it took him about a year, but as he began to explore it, he did just like Afterlife and said, okay, well, maybe I could explain this. Maybe a nurse said this when I wasn't looking, maybe this, but what about this? That's exactly what Sabom went through before he determined his patients were really leaving their bodies. So this just does not fit well within a naturalistic worldview or a materialistic worldview.
And I want to note, too, that I don't know if we mentioned this on the previous episode, but, just reiterate it here, that a lot of these cardiologists and doctors that went in to investigate this did approach it from a naturalistic perspective. But they wanted to remain diligent in their dedication to truth and the pursuit of truth and finding an actual explanation for it. And it moved them off the naturalistic position into a spiritual position. They moved from materialism into more of like a dualistic perspective of belief in the soul and the body. So
when I look at the long-term researchers, they seem to have all gone through this. They were trained in more of a just look at the naturalistic causes of things, reductionism, let's reduce it down to some kind of materialistic cause. And then this just kind of hit them out of nowhere with some experience with a patient or a good friend. In Dr. Long's case, they had a couple over for dinner, and the couple said one of them had had a near-death experience, and he thought, there's no reason for them to be lying about this. What is this about? And he had enough scientific curiosity to follow up on it and begin studying the experiences, which over time, each of these people, you look at Sabom, Grayson, Long, different ones, they started off kind of in a materialistic mind view, also Van Lommel. And then over time, they would look at it and say, this just does not fit with a naturalistic worldview. And the naturalistic explanations don't do a good job of explaining this entire experience.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. But
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so what about this article? Okay.
I was going to come back to that too. Yeah. So I was going to say that
American, and it's quoting, they're getting their information from an article in Trends in Cognitive Sciences. Okay. So why do these articles get out there and present what seems like misinformation? It's the title is claiming that, hey, now we found out their naturalistic explanations. Where did that title come from? And why wasn't this article summarizing the best of the evidence to date, which had been showing that these naturalistic explanations were not adequate? So what happened was, it's very interesting because one of the authors, Carolyn Watt, was interviewed, I believe it was on Skeptico, and he said, what was the deal with this article? It's gone viral, and everybody, a lot of people believing it and saying, okay, we can dismiss near-death experiences. And she says, okay, well, this article, there's a category of articles in that journal called Forums, Science and Society. This is Watt, the author of the article, talking. These articles are deliberately designed to be provoking of debate. The whole idea of this group of articles is not to claim that you're making some comprehensive review. It's not to produce any new evidence for testing a theory, for example. It's a bit like an opinion piece, like an editorial in a newspaper, where you make an argument that is intended to stimulate discussion and provoke debate. So she's saying, okay, well, there's not really anything new here. We're just trying to provoke debate, get something out there. The problem is when that goes viral, it's out of its context. Everyone thinks that, oh, well, they're summing up the scientific evidence when they're really not. It also states in the article, a handful of scientific studies of near-death experiences do exist. I'm thinking, a handful? I mean, actually, from my research, and if you look at the Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, which summed up about 30 years of near-death experience research, over the past few decades, over 55 researchers or teams published over 65 studies of over 3,500 near-death experiences. That's some pretty extensive research. So it gives some wrong information. It misquotes Van Lommel's study. The title sensationally claims to provide significantly new information, and yet it really doesn't seem to. I mean, Moody from the very beginning dealt with naturalistic explanations, and then they were studied in the years after it. And then it ignores all the positive evidence, such as we just saw in that report by the doctors. These are very well-respected doctors reporting an incident, and you say, okay, well, could lack of oxygen explain that? Well, if so, how could that person read the mind of the cardiologist?
Yeah.
How could they know a conversation that was going on in another room. It just doesn't fit the evidence. And so we need to do a better job when it comes to what we read and what we believe. My students in my classes tend to, what they're used to doing in high school before they get to college, and they still do it once they get to college. You say, okay, well, I'm going to research near-death experiences. They'll go in, find a couple of articles, then write a report on it, just assuming them to be true, without reading several articles, getting to the best research, finding the summary articles that summarize the research over a period of decades. We just tend to read things and believe what we're inclined to believe rather than doing further research.
Yeah, and to further that point, you can't engage with basic. For example, when they start out this study and they say the basic features of near-death experiences, there are a number of common features across near-death experiences in one study. One. So when they go to establish what is, in our arguments, considered one of the most important aspects of near-death experiences, which is establishing the pattern, establishing the core elements, they consult one study that they can cherry pick that has favorable odds or favorable numbers to the things that they're looking forward to rejecting, which is awareness of being dead. 24 said they had an out-of-body experience. 31% remember moving through a tunnel, and 32% report meeting with deceased people, along with the feeling of euphoria and bliss. I feel like they cherry-picked this one study, and they're not even engaging with the seminal work of Moody's book, which then establishes a pattern, which has then gone on with other books to write and follow that pattern out. So I just feel like they're not. This was your whole point in the second episode that we talk about this, is that they're not actually trying to engage with it on the highest level possible. They're just trying to get into it just far enough and then be like, we're throwing knives in the kitchen, and it's the same as Tom Brady throwing footballs in the Super Bowl. And so there you go. There's your scientific explanation. And even furthermore, they titled this study, "There's Nothing Paranormal About Near-Death Experiences." How can you make that claim?
And Watt herself says that title was not put on by them.
It was provocative.
Again,
yeah.
It's provocative. It's put on by the journal itself. Some editors said, "Hey, this will get out there." What I see consistently among the critics, among the naturalists, I just don't see very many, if any, naturalists who are really delving to get into the scientific literature and look at it in depth. Inevitably, it's kind of like reading the New Atheists when they talk about Christianity, Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett or others. They don't seem to have a good idea of what Christianity is and what apologists have already written. They're not bringing together a bunch of evidence for the past. And so
it's a
the
straw man.
naturalists that are writing don't seem familiar with the material. I don't get the opinion that they've read the Handbook of Near-Death Experiences or the more recent summations of the literature. They just kind of think it sounds silly. It's kind of like people who believe in the Loch Ness Monster or believe in
it's a hallucination.
Aliens abducting people. And so it really doesn't deserve a lot of study. So you just don't go into it very much. You just cherry pick some articles and say, see, this is all hocus pocus. We're telling you the science of it. They're just not really taking the science of it seriously.
No, they're not.
Let me tie a little bit of this into Scripture, if I can. We've not dealt a lot with Scripture so far, but there are a couple of things. Let's go back to this experience that Dr. Ofterhide reported on. Number one, it argues for dualism, which we see taught in the Scriptures in places like 2 Corinthians 12. The Apostle Paul has an experience. On the other side, he says he went to a third heaven. He says, whether I was in my body or not in my body, I do not know. This is the Apostle Paul. He thinks it's possible that he went out of his body into this experience. That's dualism, saying that the Apostle Paul could exist outside of his body. Luke 8:55. Luke 8:55, there's a little girl that dies. It's said in the passage that she died. But then Jesus healed her. It says in her spirit. I'm sorry, that's not Luke 8:55. But she was told, let's see, that was Luke 6:35. Nope, I'm wrong again. But there was a girl who was healed. Believe me. She was called dead.
I'll get it for you.
And then it says that her spirit came back into her. So her spirit was gone. That's dualism. When Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "Today you will be in paradise with me. Today you'll be with me in paradise." He was saying he wasn't going to be there bodily because the thief was going to die and be buried. In his spirit, Jesus said, "I will be with you." That's dualism. And I think that's something that's reinforcing, that's underlining the Christian doctrine that you can separate from your body.
It's Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43.
Thank you so much for getting me right on that. Keep me honest over here.
Yeah.
Also, I think when you talk about the concept of signs and wonders, Jesus didn't ask people to believe just because he said it. John chapter 5, he said, "Hey, don't believe me just because I say it." In other words, don't believe me by blind faith. Look, John the Baptist predicted me. Look at the works themselves. Look at the prophecies about me. Look at the evidence. Look at the works that I do. What did Jesus do? Signs and wonders. If I understand signs and wonders correctly, something is a wonder because it arrests your attention, because it's not something you would expect in a natural materialistic world.
Right.
Turning the water into wine. You don't expect that. You expect that to take a long time. Why did it happen immediately? It was a wonder. Jesus heals somebody that's dead. Jesus heals a leper. Jesus heals a person born blind. And they said in the New Testament, they're evaluating it. Wow, nobody from the beginning of time has been doing stuff like this. What is it? It's a wonder. You don't expect it. But then it's also a sign. It's not just a little anomaly sitting out there, but it's a sign in the sense that, hey, all this stuff happened right at the time Jesus, said, let her or him be healed or come to life. It's a sign that points to something beyond the natural, to God being involved. I think this is what we're seeing in near-death experiences. They're wonders. You don't expect them coming from a naturalistic standpoint, but they're a sign too. When people go to the other side, they meet God. They meet a being of the light who they consistently claim to be God. They see angels. Angels are talked about in the Bible. They see deceased people. Jesus talked to deceased people in his transfiguration, right? So all these things are happening that reinforce what we've already seen taught in the Bible.
Well, and a critic would say, and maybe we should save this objection for the scriptural thing, but I'd be curious to see if we could quick fire answer it, Steve. A critic would say, well, if these near-death experiences were happening with the little girl and Lazarus, for example, Lazarus, another famous example of someone who died and Jesus brought back to life, why wasn't it documented in the scripture?
I think the author John had said, if everything Jesus had done were recorded, it'd take all the books in the world. They gave a select amount of things that they needed in order to be able to tell, to prove that this is really the Son of God. The big thing about those stories is who could be bringing somebody from the dead, unless we're talking about somebody that's closely connected with God and is the Son of God. Let's listen to his claims. So the big deal is that he healed the person. They're not doing a big interview to say, okay, and tell me all, what did it feel like? What happened while you were dead? What was it like on the other side? And they may have not had a near-death experience.
Yeah, or very well they may have had one, and maybe they just come back and they're like, yeah, what everything Jesus is saying is accurate. You know what I mean? I don't really feel that in that time and place and in that culture that would have been considered a phenomenon that would have been warranted to be added to the Gospels, right? Because the Gospels were more about telling the story of Jesus's life, not adding in these little footnotes about the components of these people's personal experiences on the other side of death.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one thing that I notice is that, Stephen's deathbed experience, where he
in Acts, book of Acts,
in the book of Acts, he told people what he was experiencing. Well, that was significant. That was significant in Acts to show that, Stephen was being martyred, but he was going to heaven. He sees the afterlife. That's a deathbed experience. But I think what we see through the Bible is that we see just a huge variety of visionary type activities, cover to cover. I mean, you look at the beginning and you see God talking to Adam and Eve in the garden. You know, it comes down and walks with them in the garden. This was some type of experience where they're seeing God. We see Abraham, Abram talked to by God. And it's not a blind faith thing that he took off to create this new race of people and God's people, chosen people. It was he actually heard God's voice. And then we see appearances of Jesus in the New Testament. But hey, you look at Jesus in the book, and in his original resurrection, we see him, he looks kind of like a gardener at one point. They mistake him for a gardener or someone that's there. Then you look at him in Revelation, and he appears very differently. So you have all these different kinds of visionary experiences. In Revelation, it says he was called, he heard a voice, he went up into heaven. But it's not always the same. Big variety, and I think what God is trying to do, if I understand correctly, is he's saying, don't put me in a box. Every vision does not have to be exactly the same. Every time I talk to somebody, I might talk to you through a donkey one day, which he did in the Old Testament. Don't put me in a box. And so when people say, no, near-death experiences, they got to be of the devil, I'm saying, well, why? God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. Don't put him in a box, and for sure don't call something of the devil if it might be something that's truly of God.
Yeah.
Because Jeremiah was really taken to task, or people in his age, the false prophets in Jeremiah's time, for saying, thus saith the Lord, when God had not spoken. I really think it's a serious thing when you say, oh, God couldn't do that. God would never work that way today. Those can't be of God. They're of the devil. Well, when people started saying that Jesus was doing thing of the devil, he said, you know, that's a very serious thing, attributing to the devil something that's really of God. And it's adding to the scripture. If the scripture never said, no, I'll never speak to people through near-death experiences.
Well, and Jesus also goes on to say, a house divided amongst itself will not be successful, right? And so it further asks the question of, if these people are coming back from these experiences, and what a lot of Christians, I don't think, realize is that many of these people do in fact become members of Orthodox Christian belief systems. They join churches, they join communities. They find that it most corresponds with the God that they encountered. When we see the fruit of that experience, are you really going to attribute that to the devil when these people are walking away affirmed believers in Jesus and what he had to say?
Sure. A good tree produces good fruit. Bad tree produces bad fruit. You will know them by their fruits. And according to Sabom had been hearing a lot of people say, oh, it just leads people into other religions and false beliefs and this and that. And he said, well, let me go actually survey patients and see what they say.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are a lot of people that after an experience, they interpret it all kinds of ways. Who knows?
Yeah.
But when he looked at the long-term results, these people got more involved in church. If they were in a real liberal church that didn't really believe anything anymore, they tended, like Sabom himself, to go to a more conservative one that actually believed the scriptures. They read the Bible more. They prayed more. I think they're always going to be, as in any vision, there are going to be true visions and false visions. I think there are probably true near-death experiences and false ones. People can be led astray, so we have to discern the spirits. We have to think about them. But when you see a lot of the good fruit in so many people's lives, I think it's unwise to just randomly subscribe to the devil theory that Satan's just tricking everybody somehow.
Yeah.
Seems like a bad strategy to me to get people more interested in prayer and seeking God.
I'd go a step further and say it's just outright foolishness. I think it's just you're being way too theologically rigid, and you're not allowing yourself to be open to how ancient Israel saw the scriptures. And anyway, I think we are getting on a little bit on a rabbit trail with this. Let's come back to the Scientific American article that we were engaging with originally to kind of wrap this episode up. Because what we really wanted to accomplish in this one, ladies and gentlemen, was, I know we started kind of engaging with scripture and theology, and ultimately why this is important is, again, because if we were to look at this argument and to say, okay, near-death experiences are real, right? So far, we seem to, or rather, I'll lower the bar even. I'll say that near-death experiences seem at the very least probable that they are supernatural experiences, right? I'm going to try to get that bar down there as low as I possibly can to say.
Yeah, we're just starting out this discussion over the last few weeks, so let's keep the bar low.
Yeah.
There's some seemingly supernatural elements to this thing that we need to be considering.
Right, and then when the opposition, which would be naturalism, to say no, that there is no paranormal, there is no supernatural, there's no spiritual element, they start to produce these type of articles like the one we find in the Scientific American, which then we go back and we look at all the sources that they're linking into this viral article. We come to find that they actually don't have any valid evidence proving that these things are actually resulting in the phenomena, first off. And then second off, none of any of the theories actually account for all of the phenomena. They have to constantly compile a giant list of potential things that are resulting in the phenomena. And then there's no saying of how Parkinson's is interacting with ketamine and how, oh, well, maybe these patients are having this, maybe these patients are having that. And then when you look at the near-death experiences, you find that there's people having near-death experiences with a variety of conditions. It could be, there's a famous one called Proof of Heaven, where Ibn Alexander, he's brain dead for I think it was 2 weeks or a week or something like that. He was in a straight up coma the whole time. So how is that person having it, right? Is it Parkinson's disease? Are they under ketamine? Is it some kind of anesthesia that's causing this? What about all these cardiac arrest patients where it's happening instantaneously? What about these people who are reporting having these experiences immediately after a car accident? They're not in any kind of medical facility under the influence of any type of drugs. They have a healthy brain as far as we could tell, and then they come out of these incidents with a healthy brain, and suddenly Parkinson's is just gone. So again, I just feel like it's them just throwing darts at the wall, hoping something sticks and says, hey, here's a couple of potential naturalistic objections that if you combine them all together, you can account for the phenomena of near-death experiences. And oh, by the way, we cherry-picked the study that's establishing near-death experience phenomena, and we chose the easiest ones that we could link to these other ones, to these naturalistic causes. We chose the easiest ones, and by the way, those are a little bit of a Hail Mary themselves, and we're not going to even approach some of these other ones like the deceased patients, the enhanced vision, the enhanced awareness, their ability to know things that are happening outside of them, like the video we saw today with Tom, where he says the guy knew his thoughts. What is the naturalistic explanation for that? Right? Tell me that. If you know, put it in the comment section below of how that would be happening, especially when the guy is cardiac arrested on a bed and he's passed out. So,
and I want to keep coming back to, in the end, there's several things that seem to apply to all of these naturalistic objections. Number one, there's been all this study through the years of research, which when you bring it all together, they've determined, no, it doesn't. The lack of oxygen does not explain it. A hallucination caused by who knows what does not explain it because it's so different from hallucinations. So you've got all these studies that have been done to test these theories through the years. Whoever's dealing with it needs to deal with that backlog of evidence. Number two, none of these explanations tell us how Dr. Sabom found that people could actually see their resuscitations when they were in cardiac arrest and were clinically dead. How do you explain that? You need to explain that somehow, but these explanations are not giving it. And finally, a lot of the experiences we talk about are not people who are dying. There are shared death experiences where someone else shares part of that person's death experience or near-death experience, and those people are not dying. Their brain is not low on oxygen. They're not having a hallucination, and yet they share it. And another example of someone who's not dying is crisis apparitions, where somebody sees the person that has just died saying their goodbye. They may be on another continent. They may have not even known the person was sick. And that gets us into deathbed experiences.
Yeah,
but again, this is something that's happening that is not produced by a dying brain. It's by somebody whose brain is perfectly healthy.
Yeah, we're talking about these experiences happening, and like in the video, he's mentioning them happening in children. I mean, these experiences are happening in a variety of demographics in the population. You have incredibly healthy people. You have unhealthy people experiencing these things. And so you can't necessarily just attribute it to a single. Yeah, it falls short, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just keep it to that. If they really want to engage with near-death experiences, which we invite them to do that, please do that. But you need to interact with the strongest form of these arguments. You need to steelman those arguments and get involved with the particulars. Instead, they continue to prop up these straw men and go, see, here's a couple of explanations that can totally explain away these straw men. But ladies and gentlemen, that's not how you do proper debate. That's not how you do proper truth seeking. You need to engage with the strongest form of the argument, and they haven't done that. And we're trying to do that with them. So if you have a stronger naturalistic article that you think is a solid, bulletproof attack on near-death experiences, please comment below, send it to us. We will happily spend an entire episode engaging with it and the evidence on it. Because again, Steve and I are looking for the truth in this. And the fact of the matter is, he's reviewed a lot more research than I have. I'm trying to catch up. But the fact of the matter is all the research that we've looked at where people are genuinely going into this with an open mind, they come away changed. They come away believers in dualism. They come away believing that there is definitely something beyond this life that these people are heading into and looking and getting snapshots of. And there seems to be hints in this life of what we can find out what that is, okay? So to just try to wipe all this away with a naturalistic perspective and just say, oh, well, it's this, that, and this, that, and they all just combine and that explains the phenomena is a woefully weak explanation for these experiences.
It's just not a very scientific way of dealing with it. Certainly not very objective.
Yeah, not very logical at all. Okay, cool. Well, that will lock it up for us this week. I think, Steve, next week, so tomorrow's Mother's Day, so to all of our audience members who are mothers, happy Mother's Day. You guys are the best. Next week, I think we're going to definitely start jumping into what do you think about shared experiences to further add onto this dog pile we're creating of supernatural evidence for near-death experiences, deathbed experiences, and the like.
Sounds good. And I'll just reinforce the thing. If the outcome, one of the main outcomes is the priority of love, and according to the Bible, those that we're most responsible to love are our closest neighbors. Hey, your mom went, no matter how far short your mom fell in life and in raising you, I don't know how many diapers were changed, how many meals were cooked. Shower your love on those around you. I mean, that has got to be a huge outcome every time we talk. Go love those around you. Ask yourself each morning, what have I done to show my love to someone today? Ask yourself each evening, what have I done today to show love to somebody? If you've missed out on love, you just missed out. And so we want to keep encouraging people to go that direction. And there's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done with that too. How do you show love? What is the most effective way? Study love, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, a biblical love for sure, because that's the true love that comes from the one above. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this episode. You guys know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We want to hear from you. Give us your objections. Give us your questions. Give us your affirmations. We want to engage with all of it. But be blessed. We hope to see you guys next week, Lord willing, in our next episode. See you later.